Meeting of the James City County Wetlands Board. Protocol requires to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to preserve the wetlands and to accommodate economic activity so as to prevent their depletion. We have roll call, please, Ms. Pearman.
Here.
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 Comments on the minutes? Minutes are approved. I also am required to read this. It's the protocol for our rules that we have on our public hearings. The outline for tonight's public hearing will be a staff presentation, followed by any questions or clarifications from the board. Then the public hearing will be opened. At that time, anyone wishing to speak may do so once called upon by the chair. All public speakers must state their name and address for the record. After everybody who wishes to speak have done so, the public hearing will be closed and discussion among the board will start. Moving on to first case we have is going to be presented by Mr. Long, WJPA 21-005, John Tyler Highway.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Before I get started, I just want to introduce a new member. Ms. Lauren Pudva is here. She is our new VMRC rep, so we'll be seeing her more often.
I didn't get the name.
Lauren Pudva.
Welcome.
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 Right. Ms. Carla Havens of Mid-Atlantic Resource Consulting has applied for a wetlands permit on behalf of Mr. Richard and Ms. Yesenia Buzanel to install an offshore sill with beach nourishment, sprigging, and bank grading on property located at 1493 John Tyler Highway. The applicants are proposing to construct an 80 linear foot quarry stone sill with beach nourishment and sprigging to mitigate shoreline erosion occurring on the property. The area landward of the sill is proposed to be planted to install beach nourishment, and the existing bank is proposed to be graded at a 6-to-1 slope. The resource protection area impacts from the proposed grading should be revegetated. The applicants are proposing to access the site from the uplands, and there are no vegetated wetlands impacts anticipated with this project. The applicants are proposing planting wetland vegetation behind the sill, referencing Virginia Institute of Marine Science guidelines. This project is proposed between mean low water and mean high water. Therefore, this project must be heard by the Wetlands Board. As published in the Virginia Register on July 11, 2005, the revised Wetland Mitigation Compensation Policy and Supplemental Guidelines, Regulation 4VAC-20-390-10, Virginia, as a Chesapeake Bay program partner, is committed to achieve a no net loss of existing wetlands acreage and function in the signatories' regulatory programs. In order for a proposed project to be authorized to impact wetlands and compensate for wetland loss in some prescribed manner, the following 3 criteria must be met. All reasonable mitigative efforts, including alternative siting, which would eliminate or minimize wetland loss or disturbance, must be incorporated in the proposal. The proposal must clearly be water dependent in nature, and the proposal must demonstrate clearly its need to be in the wetlands and its overwhelming public and private benefits. If the proposed project cannot meet one or more of the above criteria, the project must be denied or must occur in areas outside of the wetlands. Should it satisfy all 3 criteria, however, compensation for the wetland loss is required. The sequence of acceptable mitigation options should be as followed: on-site, off-site within the same watershed, mitigation banks in the same watershed, or a payment of an in lieu fee. If compensation is required, it should be a condition of this permit. Staff has reviewed this application and finds that this project meets the 3 criteria outlined above. While there are no vegetative impacts to the wetlands associated with this project, the applicant is proposing to grade approximately 1,600 square feet within the RPA. Staff will require this area to be replanted. Staff has reviewed the above application and recommends approval of the application as presented. Should the board wish to approve the application, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into its approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary local, state, and/or federal permits required for the project. All development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3, Floodplain Area Regulations of the James City County Zoning Ordinance, and receive all required approval and permits prior to commencement of such activities. The installation of 100 wetland plants consisting of smooth cordgrass and salt meadow cordgrass be planted 4 foot on center to revegetate the RPA. That a surety of $1,000 be paid and in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the revegetation of the graded bank. And that this wetland permit for this project shall expire on October 13th, 2024, if construction has not begun, with any extensions needed to this permit be requested and submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than September 1st, 2024, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date of this permit. Thank you, and I will now direct your attention to the screen for a brief presentation. Again, the applicant's request is to install a sill with beach nourishment with sprigging and bank grading on property located at 1493 John Tyler Highway. We've seen a couple projects come in within this area. Many of the neighbors are also proposing similar shoreline erosion projects here, right on the mouth of the Chickahominy River and the James. Here's an aerial photograph of the parcel. As you can see, many of the other shorelines around it are in the same condition as this one. The topography as it affects this site, fairly flat until you get to the edge of the bank where they are experiencing shoreline erosion. The floodplain as it affects this property. And the site plan that has been submitted to staff. The water being here, the Chickahominy River. Mean low water outlined here in red with mean high water outlined above in red. The area in yellow is the sill installation, with the area in orange being the area of beach nourishment. The area outlined in green is the 6-to-1 slope grading that is also proposed to alleviate any shoreline issues. A cross section of the proposal. Again, the bank grading is proposed at a 6-to-1. This is the area of beach nourishment and the sill. Some site photographs. This is the existing bluff that is on site. Near the edge of the property, the PVC pins being the area of the sill. Looking backwards. Again, staff does recommend approval of this permit request, given that the applicant obtains all other necessary local, state, and/or federal permits that are required for this project. All development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with floodplain area regulations of the James City County zoning ordinance. That the installation of 100 wetland plants to revegetate the RPA serves as mitigation. A surety of $1,000 to ensure that these plantings are installed be submitted to the James City County Treasurer's Office. And this wetlands permit shall expire on October 13th, 2024 if construction has not begun, with any written request for an extension be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than September 1st, 2024, just 6 weeks prior to the expiration date of this permit. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the board may have at this time.
Mr. Chairman, you mentioned that the wetlands plantings were being put in the RPA to mitigate the RPA encroachment. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on that.
It's mostly for, yes, there's wetland plantings being required for, or being proposed as part of the actual permit as beach nourishment. There's also a suggestion of some wetland plantings in the RPA. But so long as that they're native, they will be acceptable.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Long. This time I'd like to open the public hearing. Anyone in the audience who wishes to speak to this permit, please come up and identify yourself.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'm Carla Havens with Mid-Atlantic Resource Consulting, 1095 Cherry Row Lane, Shacklefords, 23156. Trevor, thank you for your thorough presentation. I just want to add two things. You may recall last month you heard the Vandasand living shoreline, and this is the next door neighbor, so we're just kind of continuing with what was approved or proposed and approved of last month for that. And then, I don't know if you went to the site, as you approach the river, of course, the activity that's proposed is on the right-hand side, but on the left-hand side of that proposed activity is a cluster of trees. And I think it was the afternoon after you and Mike went out to the site, two of those trees came down. We had a big storm come through, and it's just so undercut there, that two more trees came down. So clearly something needs to be done out there. And if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them. The wetlands plantings go between mean low and mean high, and then deep-rooted natives on the cut slope.
Thank you.
I have a question, just a basic question. For the cypress timber, I'm familiar with growing that in this area, but we've always assumed that flood events do a nutrient deposition, and the plants themselves actually benefit from an occasional flood event. Any nutrients going to be applied to the sprigs, to the planting, or any required, or do you recommend any?
Oftentimes when a salt marsh is being planted, I'll recommend 1 ounce of slow release fertilizer, like a 10-10-10 Osmocote, or just something slow release in each planting hole at the time of planting. I don't believe I specified that on there. On my drawings, I have 3 square and soft stem bulrush on 24-inch centers, but if you want cordgrass and salt meadow hay, that's fine. I don't care. And if you want us to work it out, however, whatever you want to plant, we'll plant.
It's not what I want. It's just that it occurs to me that nutrients sometimes are detrimental and sometimes they're very beneficial. And, you're the biologist. I'm not educated in this field, but you are. And I'm asking you, do you think that it would benefit the project any to have any fertilizer applied when these plants are put in?
I'm not a big proponent of fertilizing, especially this time of year. If they sprig it in the spring, I wouldn't have so much of a problem with it, but now the plants, I mean, you can plant now, but the plants they don't have the whole growing season in front of them.
Right, exactly.
So I would not encourage fertilizing at this point.
Okay, good enough. That was my question. Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to this application, please? Seeing no one else, we will close the public hearing. And what do y'all think?
I'm okay with it.
Any discussion? We're ready for a motion? Someone?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we, to adopt the resolution to grant the permit for Wetlands Board Case WJPA 21-0050.
Mr. Chairman?
Okay, and the minutes will reflect that Mr. Lukens has joined the meeting.
Right.
And the roll call is.
Welcome.
Okay, Mr. Lukens?
I yes, agree.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes,
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Project passed. Moving on, let's see, Ms. Benedette, I think this is going to be your first presentation to the board? No? Not your first, well, welcome anyway. Thank you. WPJA 210052, John Tyler Highway, riprap.
Afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Mr. Daniel Winnall, Water's Edge Construction, has applied for a wetlands permit on behalf of Mr. Willem Blindenbach and Ms. Florena Blindenbach-Dreisen to install 2 offshore riprap sills on property located at 1481 John Tyler Highway within the Gordon Creek watershed. The applicants are proposing to construct one 100 linear foot and one 75 linear foot Class 2 riprap sills to mitigate shoreline erosion occurring on the property. The top elevation of the proposed sill will exist at +4 feet mean sea level. Beach nourishment is then proposed to be installed landward of the sills. The existing bank will be graded at a 6-to-1 slope to reduce erosion caused by wave energy. Smooth cordgrass and salt meadow cordgrass are proposed to be planted as vegetative stabilization in the tidal reaches. This project is proposed between mean low water and mean high water. Therefore, this project must be heard by the Wetlands Board. As published in the Virginia Register on July 11, 2005, the revised Wetland Mitigation Compensation Policy and Supplemental Guidelines, Regulation 4 VAC 20-390-10, Virginia, as a Chesapeake Bay program partner, is committed to achieve a no net loss of existing wetlands acreage and function in the signatories' regulatory programs. In order for a proposed project to be authorized to impact wetlands and compensate for the wetland loss in some prescribed manner, the following 3 criteria must be met. All reasonable mitigative efforts, including alternative siting, which would eliminate or minimize wetland loss or disturbance, must be incorporated in the proposal. The proposal must clearly be water dependent in nature, and the proposal must demonstrate clearly its need to be in the wetlands and its overwhelming public and private benefits. If the proposed project cannot meet one or more of the above criteria, the project must be denied or must occur in areas outside of wetlands. Should it satisfy all 3 criteria, however, compensation for the wetland loss is required. The sequence of acceptable mitigation options should be as follows: on-site, off-site within the same watershed, mitigation banks in the same watershed, or a payment of an in lieu fee. If compensation is required, it should be a condition of the permit. Staff has reviewed this application and finds that this project meets the 3 criteria outlined above. While there are no vegetated impacts to wetlands associated with this project, the applicant is proposing to create approximately 5,000 square feet within the resource protection area. Staff will require this area to be replanted, which the applicant has already proposed to do. Staff has reviewed the above application and recommends approval of the application as presented. Should the board wish to approve the application, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary local, state, and/or federal permits required for the project. All development activities located in this special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3, Floodplain Area Regulations of the James City County Zoning Ordinance, and received all required approval and permits prior to commencement of such activities. The installation of 313 wetland plants consisting of smooth cordgrass and salt meadow cordgrass to be planted 4 foot on center to revegetate the RPA. A surety of $1,000 be paid and in place prior to commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the revegetation of the graded bank. The wetlands permit for this project shall expire on October 13th, 2024 if construction has not begun, and if an extension of the permit is needed, a written request shall be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than September 1st, 2024, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Now, if I can turn your attention to the screen for a short presentation. Again, this is WJPA 21-0052 at 1481 John Tyler Highway. It's for the installation of 2 riprap sills, sprigging, beach nourishment, and bank grading. Here you can see the site parcel outlined in blue. This is adjacent or neighboring to the project that Mr. Long just presented to us, which is one of these properties along here. Here is the project areas, again, similar to the project that Mr. Long just described. The topography as seen on the site with a very steep drop-off here at water, and the floodplain as it lies on this site. Here's the proposed site plan with the water on this side of the photograph. The proposed bank grading is shown in green with the sill installation in the light yellow, with mean high water and mean low water. And here's a cross section with the proposed grading, the beach fill and nourishment, and the location of the sill. Site photographs showing PVC piping outlining where the sill will stand on site. You can see another pipe through the trees there. And here, further down site, and towards the edge of the site. Photograph taken by the water also shows the current status of the slope or the bluff. Again, staff recommends approval for this project under the condition that the applicant obtain all other necessary local, state, or federal permits required for the project. All development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3, Floodplain Area Regulations of the James City County Zoning Ordinance and receive all required approval and permits prior to commencement of the activities. Installation of 313 wetland plants to revegetate the RPA a surety of $1,000 to ensure beach nourishment and plantings. This permit for this project will expire on October 13th, 2024 if construction has not begun, and if an extension to the permit is needed, written requests shall be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than September 1st, 2024, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'll take them at this time.
Thank you. At this time, we'll open the public hearing for this case. If you speak, please come forward, name and address.
Yeah, I'm Danny Winall, the agent and the contractor for the client, and I'm up in Toanna, P.O. Box 352, Toanna, Virginia. If y'all got any questions on this project? The sill's a little bit offshore. There's a nice natural tumbalo on the right-hand side or on the west side. There's a big cypress tree out there that will help encapsulate the sand. And on the east side, I believe Carla is going to submit an application probably next month and the month after that. And she's going to tie into what we've proposed over there. So that will take care of it on that side as well.
Any idea how fast the bank is eroding each year?
I'd say a foot a year, pretty much normal in this area. So southern exposure, so it's not terrible, but, the big storms do most of the damage. The daily flows don't do a whole lot, but the big storms is what causes most.
It's always sobering to know that there once was land around the cypress trees that are now
It has eroded a lot, yeah.
out in the middle of the bay there, so to speak, yeah.
It's eroded 50 feet probably.
Questions? Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to speak, please? At this time, we'll close the public hearing. Discussion by the board.
I'm okay with it.
Fairly straightforward, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
All right, I'll motion to adopt the resolution to grant the permit for Wetlands Board Case WJPA 21-0052 at 1481 John Tyler Highway.
Okay.
Norman?
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
The motion carries.
At this time, according to my itinerary, do we have any considerations for the board?
I had one question.
Please.
Didn't we have a case last month that was going to come back? The one we couldn't, there was an issue about mean low water.
Gordon's Creek, it was the.
Yes, sir. That application was deferred until November to give them adequate time to perform that study.
Oh, okay. It didn't have to come back to this board meeting. Okay.
Correct.
I couldn't remember how long we deferred it to. Okay. That was my only question.
Special privilege, anyone? Trevor, you got anything you want to bring up, anybody? If not,
Yes, sir.
we will adjourn the meeting. Please, a motion to adjourn.
Okay. I'd like to call to order the October 13th meeting of the James City County Chesapeake Bay Board. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to protect against and minimize pollution and deposition of sediment in wetlands, streams, and lakes in James City County, which are tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay. Can we have a roll call, please?
Here.
Mr. Roadley?
Here.
Mr. Gussman?
Here.
Mr. Apperson?
Here.
Mr. Dunn?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Next order of business is the approval of the minutes from the September 8th meeting. Any problems with the minutes? The minutes stand approved. The outline for tonight's public hearing will be a staff presentation followed by any questions or clarifications from the board. Then the public hearing will be opened. At that time, anybody wishing to speak may do so once called upon by the chair. All public speakers must state their name and address for the record. After everyone wishing to speak have done so, the public hearing will be closed and discussion among the board will start. Our first case is CBPA 21-0150.
Afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Mr. John Moore has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a shed on property located at 110 Paspahay Drive within the First Colony subdivision in the James River watershed. The parcel was platted in 1966 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. The total lot size of this property is 0.92 acres, of which 68% is located within the RPA. The applicant is proposing to construct a shed to the rear of the existing house, equating to approximately 175 square feet of impacts in the landward 50-foot RPA. Required mitigation of this amount of impervious impacts to the RPA equals the plantings of 7 shrubs. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a shed. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a shed is considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is in the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation, in the James City County Code to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve this request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for this project, including a building permit if necessary. The submittal of a mitigation plan equating to 7 shrubs be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. A surety of $250 be submitted in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the mitigation plantings. This exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by October 13th, 2022, and written requests for an extension to an exception shall be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than September 1st, 2022, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. I'll turn your attention to the board for a short presentation. Again, this is CBPA 21-0150 at 110 Paspahegh Drive for the construction of a shed. Here you can see the parcel outlined in blue, and again, this is in the First Colony subdivision and the James River watershed. The project location is at the rear of the house next to an existing deck. Topography at this site is fairly flat at the proposed location. And the RPA is shown in green on this current site. Here is the proposed site plan. Again, the shed at the rear of the building and the 100-foot resource protection area. Here are site photographs. You can faintly see a stake here and another one back here outlining the perimeter of the proposed shed. And looking back towards the house, another stake faintly shown here. Again, staff recommends approval for this permit under the conditions that all other necessary local, state, and federal permits be acquired. A mitigation plan consisting of 3 shrubs and a surety of $250 to guarantee plantings be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. In this exception request, approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by October 13th, 2022, with written requests for extensions submitted no later than September 1st, 2022, which is 6 weeks prior to the deadline. Thank you, and I will accept any questions at this time.
Any questions for staff? Nope. Okay, this time I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward and address the board?
Chairman, members of the board, I'm John Moore. I'm the one that put the application in.
Any questions for the applicant? No, it's pretty straightforward. Looks pretty good.
Yeah. It'll be done really quickly because my wife wants it.
I know all about
That's
that.
how it works.
Thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak? At this time, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion among the board? Okay, can someone make a motion?
Motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 21-0150 at 110 Paspahe Drive.
We have a roll call, please?
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes?
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
The motion carries.
Okay, thanks for coming out. Next case is CBPA 21-0155, 210 Red Oak Landing.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, Watershed Planner, here to present CBPA 21-0155. Mr. Clint Morrison has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a retaining wall on property located at 210 Red Oak Landing within the Powhatan Creek watershed. Parcel was platted in 1962 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. Total lot size of this property is 2.86 acres, of which 75% is located within the RPA. There is an existing 40 square foot retaining wall on property adjacent to an existing pier. The applicant is proposing to replace this retaining wall and extend it by a total of 20 square feet. The proposed extension will be constructed on both sides of the existing pier. Total mitigation requirements for the proposed impacts equate to the plantings of 3 shrubs. The applicant has already planted 6 shrubs, therefore exceeding mitigation requirements for the proposed retaining walls. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a retaining wall. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a retaining wall is considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Code to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances, either permitted or non-conforming, that are related to adjacent parcels, and that reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval of this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into its approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and/or local permits as required for the project, including a building permit if necessary. This exception request approval shall become null and void if construction has not begun by October 13th, 2022, and written requests for an extension to this exception shall be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than September 1st, 2022, 6 weeks prior to the expiration date of this permit. I'll now direct you to the screen for a brief presentation. Again, the applicant's request is to construct a retaining wall on property located at 210 Red Oak Landing in the Powhatan Creek watershed. Parcel outlined in blue on your screen, and the watershed divides here in purple. An aerial photograph of the site and the general area of the proposed construction being to the rear of the house and adjacent to the wetlands that exist on property. Topography as it exists, as you can see, it slopes down towards the water, and it is at the base of the topos that the applicant is proposing this retaining wall. The floodplain as it affects this property, and the resource protection area outlined here in green. A site plan that has been submitted. Again, the proposed retaining wall that is new is just adjacent to the pier, and the existing retaining wall just a little bit further out. Resource protection area outlined here in red. Some site photographs. As you can see, the existing retaining wall here is made out of bricks and is beginning to fail some. Additionally, adjacent to it, they are seeing and experiencing quite a bit of sloughing going down towards the water. So their plan is to extend this retaining wall over to the edge of this pier and then to the other side of it as well. Looking back towards the pier from the beginning of the existing retaining wall. These are the mitigation photos that were taken last week that have already been installed. The requirement of 3 shrubs being exceeded as they have planted 6 already. Again, staff does recommend approval of this exception request, given that all other necessary local, state, and/or federal permits are required as necessary. Then this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by October 13th, 2022, and that written requests for an extension be submitted to the James City County Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than September 1st, 2022, 6 weeks prior to this exception request's expiration date. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Any questions for staff? Nope.
Trevor, what is the material going to be that is going to be used for the construction of the retaining wall?
I'm not aware. I'll defer that to the applicant.
Is there any mechanism for drainage of water held back by the retaining wall during a storm event?
Not to my knowledge, but I will let the applicant correct that if that is incorrect.
Okay.
The erosion caused by the effect of the water, since it's right there at high water, is it caused by the water coming off the land, or is it actually the erosion from weather events associated with the?
I believe the erosion is likely caused upland. In this portion of Powhatan Creek, there is a significant marsh area really bordering that property. And there's also not a exceptionally large fetch coming in for tides. So I do not believe that the erosion is occurring as a result of velocity from waves. So I think that it's more so natural erosion as the property continues.
Thank you.
Mr. Long, could you bring up the topography again? The shot you
Sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward and address the board? If you heard, we have a couple questions for you. What material are you going to use? Any drainage in it? And if you have any information about the erosion, please share that with us.
Sure. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me, members of the board. My name is Clint Morgeson, property owner, 210 Red Oak Landing Road, Williamsburg, Virginia. Which would you like first?
How about the material?
Okay, the material is going to be used from the leftover piling tops of the pier construction. So it is ground contact, marine grade, 10-inch diameter piling lumber. Additionally staked with rebar to hold it at its location and fortified with some cement underneath as well.
And how about a drainage through the retaining wall?
So this is really to arrest surface runoff as it comes from the landward side. So the drainage through the retaining wall above ground will be 2 to 4 inches high. So it will just simply slow down water as it sloughs off of our property into the marsh. I don't anticipate large needs for drainage. There won't be a lot of back roiling in front of the retaining wall. However, since they are circular pilings, it will be allowed to seep between each timber.
Are you doing the work yourself?
Yes, sir.
Any questions for the applicant?
How deep are you going to bury those piles, just out of curiosity?
Since I'm doing it myself without the aid of heavy machinery to reduce the disturbance and keep costs low, if we're being honest, we're looking at maybe a 8 to 10 inch deep trough. Like I said, staked with rebar through the middle of each piling and a small layer of concrete underneath just to hold that rebar down.
Can I ask the staff, you guys have seen the plans for all this, and the plans look okay for this?
An engineer drawing hasn't been submitted this time, but I don't believe there should be any issues with what he's describing.
The issue that I'm bringing up is not so much the materials that you're proposing to use, but potential for failure and then rework in that area. And so it's more to make sure that the design life that you propose is achieved. And so it's that type of structure, given, depending on how much hydraulic head comes against that with water in the soil that's pushing on that wall, will determine, how long it stays in place. I know it's a short wall, and your intention is to build a fairly short wall, so it's probably okay, but that's the reason for the questions.
Understandable, thank you. Mostly looking for a visual improvement to the crumbling brick retaining wall left behind by the previous owners, but definitely looking to also just slow down the water as it runs off of our yard.
I'm a bit, I mean, I haven't seen the specific physical location, but from the pictures, it almost looks as though you're setting up a conduit to sort of catch your water and drain it right towards your pier. And so that might become more of a major outlet for water in a storm condition. And just being aware of that and sort of getting that kind of flow might make your pier last longer, and not so you wouldn't undermine the pipe.
Thank you for that. I do intend to make the angle of the wall such that it doesn't cause the funnel effect that you described. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? At this time, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board? Any comments? Okay. Can we have a motion?
I move to adopt a resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board Case CBPA 21-0155 at 210 Red Oak Landing.
Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Rodley?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Motion carries.
That concludes our public hearings for tonight. I don't see any matters for board consideration tonight, but under matters of special privilege, we do have one issue, the appeal that was discussed last month of 5032 River Drive, where we had the slope failure. Mr. Long, do you want to tell us where we are with this now?
Certainly. The individuals involved with the appeal at 5032 River Drive have requested a deferral of this application, likely until the January meeting, in order for all the parties involved to reach a settlement that is amenable to everybody involved. They're requesting a deferral with the approval of this board.
If I could ask a question, Mr. Chairman, the resolution in January is a clearing of issues and potentially transfer the property to a new owner?
That is correct, to surmise.
And then you would expect an application to be submitted to stabilize that shoreline?
Yes, sir.
So how long between now and when you think they will actually be able to do that?
Submit the application.
start performing the work?
Don't know entirely as far as
Yes.
an exact approximation. I do know that some of the interested parties are drawing up site plans. So it should not take exceptionally long to get things submitted, at least to the state, once all legal issues are resolved.
And we've not been able to really encourage them to do any type of stabilization of that situation, or is it as we saw it in the field?
Been heavily encouraged. Nothing has yet been required.
Thank you.
Is the request for the deferral to a certain date? What,
Yeah, it's to January 12th, so if you're amenable to postponing it, it'll be to that date.
well, January
12.
12th?
Why is it linked? Why is the fine linked to handing the property over to, or this discussions to pass it off to the adjacent landowner? Is that gonna, if this goes through, or is that gonna, are we gonna drop the fine?
I think that's all part of the current discussion with the multiple attorneys involved. I have not told them that they can drop the fine, so that is certainly still on the table. And we don't know for sure if the property is going to be transferred. I'm asking also, or I agree with the request only because it will be much quicker than any sort of litigation we initiate. So I'm hoping that we'll have a global settlement, with the adjacent property owner, the current property owner, the nursery who performed some of the work, and the opinion of the county. And then also, I believe the structures group is now involved in this ongoing discussion.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, this will be more expedient than pursuing the,
In my opinion, yes.
okay, thank you.
Man, I hate to see all that sediment sitting out there in the river. It's taken a long time to get around, but by the same token, I mean, if the county initiates legal action, that's not going to be a speedy process either.
I would just ask that staff continue to encourage the parties involved to implement some type of interim measure to help prevent further deposition in the river to the extent practical. I know it's a difficult task and it's a difficult situation, but I encourage that they're moving forward, but it would be nice if there was an interim measure to help safeguard.
Certainly.
I'd like the minutes to reflect that, I'd like to request like an update at our, next meeting on progress, if you can speak to that, where we are, if anything's happened, if anyone has a sense of that.
Can certainly do that.
Okay, so at the next meeting, come to us with something so we can hear what's going on with it. I don't want this to drop off the radar for sure.
Certainly not. So we'd be happy to do so.
Okay. I don't believe there are any other, we have to have a vote on the request for the deferral till January 12th. All right. I'd like to make a motion for the deferral till January 12th, 2022.
Okay, Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Rodley?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
And the motion carries.
All right. It's put off. I don't believe there are any other matters of special privilege. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
A move.
We are